Welcome to Throwing Out Some Heavy Lights, Alelo, the South African Project. And with me today, we have Merapelo Letebele, who is in Mount Kodi, Botswana, and she will talk to us about some of the issues related to factors and things that impact Africans throughout the diaspora. So first, I start off, Shauna, can you share with the viewer and a little bit more about yourself?
My name is Merapelo Letebele. I am mostly known as Shana, and I am the project coordinator for the MORE project in Southern Africa. I am based in Mankodi, a very small village right outside Gaborone in Botswana, in Southern Africa. So I'm happy to be here today.
Good, welcome. One of the things that we've talked about in our communities and elsewhere and throughout the continent and so on are some issues that impact Africans, and particularly Africans living in Southern Africa. And from your vantage point, what are some of those most pressing issues that we need to be concerned with or address? We're going to help in terms of dealing with some of our continuity as a community, as a people. What are some of those issues from your vantage point?
As you know, Africa is riddled with a lot of economic problems. So there's extremely high unemployment rate, especially for young people. More and more young people are coming out of universities and they just cannot find employment. Economies are not growing. And we have mass migrations of Africans across the continent trying to find jobs and other means of survival. We are also being threatened with the threats of global warming, and it doesn't look like African countries know how to even prepare for it, but it looks like they're going to be the most affected. We still have issues of women's rights lagging behind. A lot of African women, socially, they are okay, but they are not decision makers. They are politically alienated by the men folk. So there's a whole lot of that. We have a lot of African children growing up in single female-headed households and things like that. So we still have a lot of problems, but despite all that, Africans are going on, life is going on, they're trying the best that they can.
Good.
And the majority of these issues are beyond their control, really.
Yeah. I'm going to pause the Zoom recording. Okay, good. Okay, now, the other question I have for you, Shauna, is that we have been discussing in our community and elsewhere the issues of reparations and the enslavement of millions of Africans by the West for a number of generations ago. What are your viewpoints or your perspective related to the reparation conversation in Southern Africa? Does it really impact those Africans who lived in the southern part of the continent? Because we both know if it is West African issue.
I think the calls for reparations from the past wrongs, the enslavement and colonization of Africa are very, very valid. But in Africa, their voices are a little bit muted. It's something that you can pick up from, African Americans more. I don't hear a lot of Africans talking about it because it's almost like some people don't understand the impact of slavery and colonization. Because remember, with the end of colonization, when Africa became independent, all the colonial masters left, so the Africans are very much in control. So it's almost like there's a disconnect between the effects of colonization and the reality of Africans at present.
We're going to interrupt a little bit, and I want to just talk a little bit more about the reparation issues. Talk to me a little bit more about this reparation. Give me a little bit more backdrop for how that impacts people in Southern Africa.
I don't know how much of what I said was recorded, and I'm sorry if I'm going to repeat, but I was saying the voices that are calling for reparations in Africa are very much muted. You don't hear a lot of people talking about it. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that with the end of colonization and the European masters leaving Africa, the people took over power, political power and economic power, but so it has created some kind of a disconnect. It's like people don't even understand how much of African wealth was looted. And I think we should step up efforts to talk about it more and just pursue it to the end and speak with one voice as Africans to demand reparations. We must get some of our resources back. People stole diamonds and gold from Africa when they were colonialists, and they should bring those things back or otherwise compensate Africans for what they took instead of just giving back artifacts. Yes, artifacts are very valuable, but at the same time, so things that have, tangible monetary value, in the form of gold and other minerals were taken as well. And we must demand it all back because we know which colonial power was operating and, mining what, where. We know all those things. So it should be easy for us to, follow it up and, at least come to some kind of a consensus and agreements and preparations.
Donna, one of the things that many people are not aware of is the extent of enslavement in the Southern African continent, particularly in South Africa and again parts of that area. Was there any notion, or did you know of the people, were they enslaved? I saw a piece in one comparison analysis that there were some Angolans who was captured from some Portuguese and they put them in enslavement in South Africa. But are there other examples of enslavement that you're aware of in Southern Africa?
Oh, you know what? Enslavement of Southern Africans is as old as, the world has been. Much earlier in the history or civilization of our world, the Arabs had been active in Mozambique, for instance, and they had been taking a lot of people from that general area, Mozambique, and even sometimes reaching all the way into places like Zimbabwe. But because not a lot of it was written down, people don't even know. You need to go and read old documents from, the 16th or 15th century in order to see those kind of things. The Arabs were very active on the eastern, I guess the Indian Ocean part of the world, and all along from East Africa all the way down, they were taking a lot of Africans. And later on, when South Africa was being colonized, or the early stages of the colonization of South Africa, a lot of slaves were taken out and many more brought in. But some of those records, of course, I'm sure if we dig hard enough, we can still find some of them, but a lot of them are hidden from view. Who knows, even though Namibia, for instance, has a very difficult coast, there haven't been a lot of seafaring people were not able to come into South Africa, to Namibia. It's very highly possible that some have been taken from there as well. Like you mentioned, Angola, that one is straightforward. Everybody knows that they all ended up in the regions of Brazil and all those kind of places. So in the past, there had been the earliest known people who enslaved Southern Africans were the Arabs, and later on came the Portuguese and the Boers, like the people from Holland. They enslaved Africans within Africa. The kind of slavery that they instituted is a little different because they didn't take a whole lot of people out, but they enslaved them within the region. So
very good.
Yeah.
Most of us are not aware of that. We don't always study that in our African American studies classes. So particularly we talk about the continent of Africa, particularly Southern Africa. By the way, I understand you spent some time in the United States. When you were here, I understand you were working on your degree in journalism and so on. Did you encounter racism, or did you see racism, and how does that maybe compare with the racism that we may have in South Africa, or under the apartheid system, or even today?
Personally, I didn't really have any racism directed at me, but it was happening to other people around me. Even during the time when I was studying, when I spent the 4 years in the United States, I knew where to go and where not to go. So I think for that reason, I wasn't able to come into direct, what do you call it, contact with it. But it did happen around, African Americans. It happened to African Americans, a few of the African students that I knew. But I'll tell you something, because I was in the US recently. I came back last month. A very interesting incident happened where on my flight to South Africa, I met an African-American lady, an older woman who is a retired nurse, and she experienced racism in the flight a month ago. She was sitting next to a white lady who was very angry that she had touched the pillow and the little blanket that they give on the airplane, and she asked to be moved. And that kind of caught me by surprise because it's 2023, and if you are a white person and you're traveling to Africa and you don't want to sit next to an African on the plane or an African American on the plane, I don't know how you're going to survive, because when you come to Africa, all you're going to see is just Black people, and how are you going to survive? And, I have a good mind to actually write to the airline that I was in to tell them that, maybe the time has come for them to even run a little advert of, anti-racism message to say, they cannot tolerate it. I know that the airline had nothing to do with it, but I'm just saying it happened in their flight. And I was very, very surprised. I ended up sitting next to the old woman because the white lady asked to be moved.
Wow. That's one of the reasons why we need to talk about racism and anti-racism, race equity, because it happens all the time in overt and sometimes covert and subtle means. And so we need to deal with that.
A month ago. Less than 3 weeks ago, it happened. I saw it.
Wow, directly. And it was on the airplane of all places, that they would say. Sometimes you see that in these redneck places and these small environments where people don't deal with people of color, particularly African Americans. I want to switch up a bit, and I know that you've been following a little bit about some of these issues that are going on. There's been this international conflict that's going on in Ukraine and Russia, and then I've seen the United States is at concerns about the impact of Russian diplomats or people in terms of internal affairs of the United States. There's issues going on on the continent of Africa, Russia, and so on. What do you make of the treatment of Black people in terms of this whole issue, or what should be some of our concerns or issues we should talk about dealing with this whole Russian issue, and particularly the global conflict between China, Russia, and the United States, and of course the Africa kind of continent is in the middle of some of that. What are some of your observations of the issue, or those issues rather?
Ooh, that is a very difficult issue for a Black person to talk about, because, sometimes you wonder, okay, these are the world masters and superpowers fighting, and you just wonder, if an African has any voice. But it's kind of strange, because I know that a lot of Africans, including African governments, seem to be calling silently for a new world order, where they think that Russia and China should, do whatever it is that they want to do and become the dominant powers over, the United States and the British alliance. And, it'll be very interesting, because I wonder where that will leave Africans, because we are always the pawns in the global political stage games, especially. So I don't know how it's going to happen, because I recently interviewed some Botswana students who actually studied in Russia. And they'll just tell you how nice everything was in Russia, how they never experienced racism there. And even though racism happened in other ways, but they didn't see any directed at them, conspicuously. So it'll be very interesting to see how what happens, because Russia has very strong links with the African liberation movements. They were helping a lot of these governments to fight the European powers to gain independence. So I understand why Africans would lean that way, but it might be a little controversial. But I'm just saying, as an African person who's aware of what's happening in the world, it's kind of interesting to see. But we don't know if Russia, suppose Russia and China alliance deposes America, I don't know what it means for the continent of Africa. I don't know if it's going to affect us in any positive way or any negative way. It remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm. We have talked about a number of issues and so on, and one of the things I wanted to kind of switch up to talk more internally into Southern Africa, particularly South Africa. I saw an article that was posted by the Rand, I think it was the Guardian, one of the either the Guardian, one of the newspapers in South Africa, Mail and Guardian, I'm not quite sure, but it was talking about the Zulu King and the amount of money and millions of dollars that they are getting from the South African government. I know many people think of South Africa, think of only the Zulus, they don't think about the Swanas, the Paleys, the Xhosas, and so on, different groups over there. And my question particularly is this tribal group is getting millions of dollars from the South African government. Are there other South African tribal groups, nation groups, as we may call them today, that are getting that kind of money from the South African government purse or the public till, as we would say? And what's your opinion of that?
Well, it's a very internal, South African political issue, but at the same time, since some of my ethnic people are also a big part of the South African Republic, I can offer an opinion to say that I think the Zulu are more organized. Basically, that's what it means. If other ethnicities or tribes or whatever are unable to raise their own king or whatever, so that the South African government can recognize them, it's on them. You know what I mean? So it is a little unfair when you look at it from one angle, but I think I know that, there are some rumblings in South Africa where all the different tribal groupings are trying to get their own kings recognized so that they can have the same benefits. That's just something that I know is happening, but to what extent, I cannot say at this point.
Yeah. One of the things
that it's upon the tribes themselves to get their own, because they cannot agree amongst themselves who should be, the sole king, so that they can get the necessary recognition. And it's always funny how, when I look at this issue, it's just a little side thing, but how all the South African or the African tribes, all the different tribal groupings were the ones who fought colonialism. But then when they were defeated, a new European style of government was ushered into place, democracy. And that democracy took away all the powers from the people who actually fought in the beginning of colonization. You know what I'm saying? So now they have to go and beg for, money from governments to be able to run their tribal affairs. It's kind of funny, but that's what it is.
Speaking of, I noticed you use the word king a couple of times. Are there such things as females who are tribal leaders or chiefs in various groups in Southern Africa? Is it possible a woman to be the head of that whole system? And do we have examples today in Botswana or elsewhere that you know of?
Yeah, we have a few. Within the different tribal groupings, a tribe might have like 15 or 15, sometimes 15 subsections, and one of them might be a female. It happens in a lot of, especially in the Tswana culture, there'll be a few that I know of. Even right here in Botswana, there's a tribe called the Balete, and that chief is female, and she's been there for a very long time, more than 15 years, I'd say, or maybe 15 years. And just because of democracy, things are a little easy for her, because otherwise her male counterparts wouldn't allow for a woman to become a chief.
By the way, how do you become a chief? Some of us don't know that. Is it the firstborn or is it the male? Because we see a lot of men who are traditionally chief. How does a female become a chief? And technically, how is it done? Or how do they assume that position in these respective groups?
You know what? Because according to our culture, we had polygamous marriages, including the chief or the king. He could have as many wives as he wanted. So there was always one of these wives she was not necessarily the first one to be married. There was one that the whole tribe would choose for her. That I'm talking about the Setswana culture. There would always be that one queen whom the tribe helped to pay for her bride price, and she was the one who would raise a king. Mm-hmm. And her firstborn son would be the one to become a king when the father died. So you might find a situation where, suppose a king had 5 wives, and maybe the third one was the third wife he married was the one who was supposed to produce a king. If he failed if she failed to produce a male heir, then the other brothers could be considered.
Oh, wow.
You understand? Yeah, but in the case of this Balete tribe, there had been this reigning queen, if I can call her that. She was the firstborn, but she had a brother later on in the one of her brother was just one of the siblings. I can't remember what number he was on the order of their birth, and because he was male, he is the one who became king just because he was male. And when he died, then this female lady said, no, but I'm going to take over. So things like that can happen.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, we didn't know that. One of the questions that come to mind again, as we deal with many of these issues with Moore and Salelo and you name it, is we're trying to get people more involved in social justice issues and national, local, social public policy. I'm not saying politics per se with a big P, but just say to be involved in their communities and trying to help shape things to be much better for them. What are some ways that the average person can engage our local and national officials to particularly to make things better for us as communities, our society, from your vantage point?
There are so many ways people can join political parties, people can form pressure groups. There are so many things that people can do, but Africans just tend not to do it for some reason. They can't even write letters to their representatives, and they end up, missing out on a lot. I don't know if, there is like a lack of political education so that citizens can know what they can do or how they can engage with elected representatives, political representatives. I don't know what the issue is, but those are some of the ways. But there's a very unique process here in Botswana where, we have the village, what we call the kgotla, which is pretty much a village square where the traditional leader lives. So every political leader or any government official, if they want to have access to the community, they have to address meetings at this forum. So at a certain time during the year, your elected representatives, such as a member of parliament, will call meetings to, some wards in any given locality so that they can interact with the people. But all that ever happens from there is for this elected representative to, tell you, oh, this is where I've been in the parliament and this is what we discussed. These are the new laws coming up or things like that. And the people will obviously say, oh, we need roads, we need this, but nothing ever gets done just because the government of the day works, according to these 5-year plans that they have for themselves. They plan ahead. So even if you have a pressing issue right now and the whole of your community can attend a forum like that, no matter how much you yell or talk or whatever, if it's not in the plan, it's not on the plan. It's not gonna be done.
Wow. By the way, in the United States, and I suspect in other parts of the world, people use email a lot to communicate with public and elected officials. And I know in terms of rural communities, people sometimes have challenges with electricity, internet connections, phones, you name it, and so on. From your vantage point, do a lot of the elected officials in Botswana use the email system or text messaging to communicate with their constituents in their respective location? Are you aware of any of that?
A lot of the people, Botswana is primarily semi-rural. The people live in villages. Therefore, they may not even if they know how to use, the internet or whatever, they're not going to be able to because they cannot afford it, the majority of them. So it would not be, in my view, because I've worked as an administrator in one of the offices for a member of parliament in the past. I know that it doesn't work. People prefer to come in, personally to come and register their complaints. But you see, if you are not organized, if it's just one little voice, it's easy to get sidestepped or forgotten. I wish people could be smart enough to know that they need to organize and speak with one voice. If there's a group of you, or, I used to try and get people to say, hey, let's all write letters to a council our councillor, you know, and then some people will be like, no, but he's from our political party, so we cannot say anything negative like that to him. You know, people just don't like challenging authority in these parts, unfortunately.
Johnny, in our communities throughout the continent as well as in the United States and I suspect elsewhere, there's this whole debate about women's issues and the rights of women to be in leadership and also for women to have equality in various areas. And so my question in kind of generic sense to you is, how are women treated in Botswana from your vantage point and also from your experiences?
Did you say how are women treated?
Right, exactly. Are they equal in income and political power and economic and everything you described? So is it a very egalitarian system for women? And that's a kind of a
No,
you kind of smile as you say that.
because we are just another African country when it comes to that. We simply don't have, you know, the necessary women empowerment. And, you know, it's kind of sad because, you know, my society is missing out on having the best that they can get out of their own citizens. Because if you leave out one constituent, it means there's an imbalance in power. So if it's like that, then if one gender or one group or even one tribe is more dominant over others, then the system can never work because there will always be rumblings. Women in my country are pretty much free. They are allowed to vote, they can drive cars, they can do whatever they want pretty much. But when it comes to access to opportunities, it's not there. For instance, in a country like mine where there's such high unemployment, you'll be surprised to learn that women were not even allowed to join the army. But before we knew that the army, joining the army is one way that a woman can get employed because we don't have any active military concerns. When people join the army, they go there to better their lives more than to go fight wars, right? And so if you exclude women from that, it means they do not have the same opportunity to work. You know, so I think about 15 years ago or so, they changed it. I mean, and 15, you know, a lot of things happened 15 years ago where before then, women were not allowed, even if you were married in community of property with your husband, you were not allowed to take a loan by yourself and things like that. So that changed just quite recently. So I think we will catch up eventually, but we don't have the same opportunities. They are there in paper, okay? Nobody will say women cannot do this, you know, but when you try to get there, it's not going to be there because a lot of women in my country are unmarried, but they have children and the men won't even help to raise their children or even support them financially. So I feel like women deserve, you know, more help because the children that they're carrying make up citizens of this country. So if a government is out there planning or building schools, building hospitals, they're building them for the citizens, those children. So if you don't help women raise their children, it means you are disadvantaging a very important one half of your population because I think according to our population, women's numbers are probably even like 52% compared to the men.
Wow.
Yeah, you have countries like South Africa where women have grants when they have children. There's some benefits to help them raise kids, but not in my country. And that's something that I'd really like to pursue, given the opportunity to try to get the powers that be, because all the decision makers in my country are men. Whether you look at the parliament, there are fewer women. There are 57 seats in parliament, and I think there are only about 6 or maybe 7 women out of that 57. And 4 of them got there through a special election. They did not run for elections. So the ruling party has the right to pick any women from anywhere in the country to say, come and become a member of parliament.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, well, one of the questions people measure the quality of society is how well they treat the least of its citizens are the different segments and groups, and so it's very important. We have not.
Actually, sorry, can I just say this? Sorry. I think the measure of any society, how well a society is doing, should be how you treat your women.
Good point.
And your children.
Thank you. And then one of the things we say, the least among us, sometimes we look at the quality of life for those who are not doing financially well. That's how we should measure our society. We're going to switch up a little bit. And I know there's been a recent conflict in Sudan and so on, and there's fighting going over there. And we thought that had been resolved. I did read somewhere that Sudan conflict was one of the longest skirmish battles, fights on the continent of Africa. What do you make of that whole Sudan conflict? And I know it's military against military or paramilitary groups versus civilians. Talk to me about.
It's actually very sad to see what's happening in the Sudan right now. Sudan is a very sad state of affairs because it looks like there's a civil war. I've seen horrible pictures, videos of soldiers just killing people. And I think it is just power play, basically. It's just one group of men thinking that they can do a better job than the people who are currently in power, and they're going to wrestle it from them. They're going to wrestle power from the ruling group. It just happens everywhere. I think in the animal kingdom, men are the decision makers. Men are the ones that go to war. Men would kill each other over just to become the next leader. That's just the way it is. And it's sad because South Sudan is a very, very brand new country. They just became independent. And obviously, whenever you see so much consternation and dissatisfaction among the general population, it means that maybe the government is not doing something right. And the people are just rising up and they are going to show their displeasure in various ways, including picking up walls and becoming rebels. That's just the way it is. And it's very sad.
Wow. One of the things that we noticed in Nebraska and the United States is an influx of Sudanese refugees in the past 20 years, and again became much more noticeable where we had one of the highest concentration of Sudanese refugees in Nebraska in the whole United States. And so I've learned a great deal about their culture and about the various people and so on. And it's somewhat sad because at one point there was a peaceful treaty and all this peaceful environment and culture, and all of a sudden now erupt again, and here we are. And so I know the world community is concerned and trying to alleviate that conflict because, again, when you see some of the graphic stuff that you describe, when you see this happening, it really causes a great deal of pain in a lot of folks, not only those who are directly involved, but those who have been supporting this peaceful coexistence of various groups. We're getting,
and the worst thing about, sorry, go on.
I was going to say we're getting closer, but yeah, go back to the Sudanese comment you're going to make. Go ahead and say something there.
No, I was going to say, that in the past, for Sudan to actually gain independence, it was almost like a class war, or I don't even want to call it it had a tinge of racism even, because the folks that were in power before were I don't know how to say this in the politically correct, I don't even know the politically correct terms, but the people who were in control of the Sudan were those Africans who kind of looked like Arabs or mixed with Arab. I don't know what the politically correct term is. So it was those against these Black Africans. So now that the Black Africans were able to secede, it's sad to see them now fighting
among themselves.
I think that's just the worst thing.
Wow. We're down to the last question on the show, a couple of them, and two questions. One is, if you had a magic wand, what immediate issues would you have folks in the West to focus on as to help people in your region, our society, as Africans or African Americans? What are some things you think what a magic wand could solve? I like using the magic wand metaphor, but give me some observations or feedback.
I think education. I wish that Africans could have access to the new form of education that is mostly IT-based. And countries like Botswana, we still have a shortage of, people in the health sector, health professionals, even though we have our own little university where doctors are now being trained. Things like that are a major concern. IT education, preparation for for global warming and women's rights. More than anything, I think when you empower a woman, you empower a whole community. So it breaks my heart to see that women who have these fatherless children, what they have to go through. That is because when a young lady has a child at the age of 18, it means they can never go back to school in the majority of times. And by the time the child is old enough to start going to school, 4 years or 6 years has gone by, and that woman is now 26, which means 24, which means it's going to be harder for her. She has to now try to get employment so that she can raise this child. So that's how women get left behind, and it happens perpetually. So I wish there was something that we could do for African governments to understand that they need to help women to raise their children, because they're the future citizens, they're the future soldiers, they're the future doctors and teachers and everything. So if you don't make sure that they're raised in a good way, there's no future.
Yeah.
Those are my top three: global warming, new training for medical field and the ITC field, and helping women, helping secure the future of our own children.
Yeah. We're at the very end, and I always like to extend to my guests any closing comments you want to leave with our viewing or participating audience. Any other last minute comments you make?
I am really excited about the partnership that we are forging with Africans and African Americans. I'm hoping that we'll be able to harness the power, because it is out there for us to grab and run with. We can change the world. We can change the world. We can fight racism together so that Africans can take their rightful place on the global stage.
Well, I appreciate that, Shauna, providing this great information, as we say, throwing out some heavy light. And we hope you can join us again as we continue in these conversations and podcasts and communication opportunities where people can talk about issues of the day as well as the issues affecting us throughout society. So thank you very much. We always end our program, may the force be with you, and Baroque.
Baroque.